Okay, so welcome everyone to the Fab 17 conference. Really happy to be here. My name is Carolina Ferro from Fab City Foundation. Well, actually, I would like to present you to Peter Troxler and Cindy Kotola. They're the ones organizing this. And Vasilis Niarus and myself are here, the local team supporting them, but they are the ones that did all the work, the call, the submission of papers, selection of reviewers, everything. So thank you so much for you both to making this happen. And today we had 3 panel sessions with 4 papers each. We had 12 papers being presented here locally in Bali, the Bali Fab Fest. And I would like to call here to the stage our moderators. So we're going to have 2 sessions, like 1 hour session, but divided in 2 parts. So the first part, we're going to have our moderators reporting what happened in each panel. And in the second part, we're going to have Regina, that's here. Yeah, I'm going to introduce you properly to her in a while. And she's going to present a bit her paper, discuss with Peter and Cindy, because she is our award paper, like winning the best paper of our academic conference. Yeah, she's really happy. You guys will see her later, but she's dancing right now. So I would like to ask, please, to come to stage, Alessandra Smith, the moderator of the first panel, Lucas Lemos, the moderator of our second panel, and Josefina Nano, the moderator of our third panel. Welcome. Welcome. Maybe you can sit there with Alessandra. You sit here with me. Is that okay? Okay. So yeah, I'm gonna just get another mic so we can all speak. So Alessandra, I would ask you to introduce yourself a bit. Also, maybe if the title of your panel, and if you can report to us a bit what happened over there.
Thank you, Carolina. That would be a pleasure. My name is Alessandra Schmidt. I am from Fab Lab Barcelona, and I had the pleasure to moderate the first panel. There were 4 papers presented, and I will do my best to present the highlights from this discussion, and I highly encourage you to take a look at them later on with more details. All the papers, they are the output of collective effort. They were made in collaboration. The first one is the Fab City Full Stack, a multi-scalar framework for distributed production strategies in cities and regions. The presenter of this paper was Vasilis Niarus from Fab City Foundation. He's based in Greece. And the paper was developed in partnership together with Tomas, Carolina, Mitali, and Ida, also from Fab City Foundations. And the highlights from the session are connected to the Fab City Full Stack, which is the topic that we have been assessing in details over and over again, this event, which is great for us to learn in practice what it means. So the framework is intending to make the Fab City mission and vision operative, and the full stack assists the regions and the cities to interpret the Fab City's challenges, and also represent a multi-scalar and ecosystemic approach. So Vasilis presented all the layers of the Fab City full stack, and in the paper you can find all the information of the background of this framework. The second paper presented was related to democratizing Fab Labs with open source machine tools, presented by Mohammed from Hamburg, Germany, Helmut Schmidt University. He co-authored with others like Melina, Tobias, and Sonia. The highlights of the papers are the contributions to a dialogue, to small-scale feasibility studies of the incorporation of open source machine tools, and especially the impetus of benefiting the OSMT development in developing countries, plus it supports the aims of the full stack discussion and the mission of making them closer to the aim of making production assessment accessible to anyone, anywhere. The third paper presented is titled as Fab City Hubs, Interfaces for Community Building and Playgrounds for New Innovative Urban Actions. The presenter was Carolina here on the stage with me from Fab City Foundation. She is based in Colombia. And the co-authors of these papers are Pablo, who is based in Spain, Carlota and Francesco, based in France. And from the Fab City Foundation, Tomas, Ida, and Mitali, respectively based in Bali, Indonesia, Barcelona, and in Singapore. So we can see the diversity of this distributed team working out together. And the highlights for this paper, the discussion was about building on top of the creative and productive hubs in comparison to the Fab City hubs, and understanding hubs as a way to organize and also a place in which you bring together talents, actors, and disciplines and skills to intensify innovation. So it emerged as an interface and a way for our networks to get closer to the community, locally, but also globally. It enforces and enables community building playgrounds for new innovative urban innovations. Just to contextualize the emergence of the Fab City hubs within the history of the creative productive hubs, the authors propose an integrated approach which are done benefiting the consequences of the role of the Fab City hubs towards their environment and impact at a local level while articulating global efforts. The main takeaway is to understand these hubs as an ecosystem activator. And the authors also present 4 case studies from different geographies, sizes, and trajectory, located in France, Iceland, Mexico, and the south of Korea. They propose an iterative progressive development of the Fab City hubs and how we can make that happen. And finally, the 4th paper presented by Regias from Belgium, done in partnership with colleagues, Benoit, Sebastien, and another Benoit. And the title is Defining the Prototyping Space to Support the Innovation Process with Fab Labs. And the main highlights, it's a discussion about one of the roles, of the many roles that Fab Labs can take, and contributing to an enactment of Fab Labs as a prototyping place for innovation. So, for example, this paper can be useful for Fab Lab managers acting as coaches, coaching prototyping processes. Hejais presents some discussion bringing frameworks like the NASA TRL, the Technology Readiness Level Scale, brings notions of hierarchical morphological prototyping taxonomies, which aims to describe the prototypes as a design representation, which is very powerful when we are trying to contribute to a narrative that we are all co-creating. It enables designers then to communicate, test, and validate designs ideas with, and the authors propose improvement of an already existing model, which is called the triangle models, defining the scales for each of the model's dimensions, and also present some use cases. So these are some of the highlights of this panel. I hope you will have the chance to appreciate the papers. Now I will hand over to Carolina back again.
Alessandra, thank you so much. Thank you for this great overview of the first panel and the highlights. Thank you. Now I will hand over to Lucas Lemos. He was moderating the second panel on critical circular economies, and with 4 papers there. So yeah, please, the stage is yours.
So in our panel, we have 4 presentations, including, but not limited to, Antonio Gordillo Guerrero was the from Smart Open Lab and University of Extremadura in Spain. Then we have also Ryota Kamio from Republic in Kagoshima, Japan. and Jerome Manatat from Fab Lab Bohol in Bohol Island State University in the Philippines. And last but not least, the award winner Regina Sipos from Technical University of Berlin in Germany. And I will try to give an overview of the discussion from my point of view, so not presenting the papers, you can read them yourselves. And I will leave also the presentation of Regina for herself later, so I will focus also on the other three ones. It's very interesting that there are similarities in the papers, even if you are coming from different points of view. There are emphasis of coming back to the places that have been more left behind, like in the paper from Antonio and the one from Ryota, coming back to communities who are being left behind. In one case, it's a community in Spain that are small populated towns that have no much to do with the economy besides agriculture, and are quite isolated. And in the case of Ryota, it's a place whose main way of living, based in a nuclear power plant that is going to close soon, have to change. So all the maker movement is coming there to bring solutions, and it's very good to see that they are doing it with support from public organizations and from multi-stakeholder consortiums, especially in the case of Antonio in Cadiz. The name of Antonio's is called Circular Lab. That is an application of the Fab Lab. They have two Fab Labs there to create spaces for education and entrepreneurship in this kind of small towns. And they have a lot of public funding, and they have a lot of educational programs with, if I remember correctly, something like 685 courses and more than 2,000 attendance only during the first year. Taking into consideration that this is a rural area, is quite successful. And in the case of Ryota, they have a lot of implementations there that are not limited to do-it-yourself bioresearch, fermentation, creative repair, or bamboo tent building, that are putting together the knowledge from the Fab Lab communities and the university, along with the local traditional crafts and the local materials that they have available there. So this far from this, then in the case of Jerome, he was presenting the upcycled waste plastic. That is a very interesting initiative. It's also coming from a Fab Lab, the Fab Lab Bohol. They try to bring a solution for the plastic, and they build a machine to press small sheets of plastic and make some kind of laminate material that is supposed to be have good properties. Then they are preparing the material to make products to sell for the commodities for home. These products have been tested with different profiles of people. They look like the acceptance of this material for home products have been very high. So they are doing from the start, from the upcycling to designing the product to checking with the market possibilities all the way along. So they are all over the place, and that's very good to know. That's from the point of view on how we start, about who is financing it. Then some more notes is that there is a lot of also grassroots involvement from Ryota, from Antonio, and from Jerome. The people is always involved in how they want to be implemented the interventions in their ecosystems, to see what is been the collaboration between the locals and the universities and the Fab Labs. Is we believe the very interesting way to go through with the critical circular economy, as we know that the circular economy is big words, but the people who are actually going to have to work with it are not being asked about how it looks like from their perspective. So we believe that these alternatives are quite legit. Beyond that, in our projects, it's also interesting to see that there is intervention always for the local public entities, and then the more let's call it supranational entities like the European Commission financing projects or so others. It means like they are quite advanced in the negotiations with many public bodies at different levels, and is creating a sense of awareness that there is public awareness of the emergency situation that have to be addressed now. So they are putting funds and they are putting resources to do this. Beyond that, we'd like to have a discussion on openness that we will get from other day. So I will make the last remarks. The initiatives are quite noble, but they have been working a lot. I mean, they have results. It's not just a prototyping phase. They have an impact with a lot of people involved, and overall, it looks going well. And I think we can stop here just for the last part. Thank you.
Thank you, Luca, so much for this great overview of the second panel. So now I'm going to invite Josefina Nano to give an overview of the third panel we had this afternoon in education, learning, and innovation. So welcome here.
Hi, Caro. Thank you. Okay, yes, so thank you all. The panel I was moderating was about education, learning, and innovation. And we saw 3 papers. The first one was by Eduardo Chamorro, also in collaboration with Daphne Gerodimou and Santiago Fuentemilla from Fab Lab Barcelona. And the title is Developing Maker-Centered Learning Programs to Promote Critical Thinking About Technology and Design for Emerging Futures. And the highlights of this paper was how it outlined the learning theories applied in the design and implementation of a methodology they developed during the first 2 cycles of the Master in Design for Emerging Futures. And basically, it examines the potential and the benefits of implementing maker-centered programs in design practices. The second paper, written by Martina Francesca Ferracone from Italy, titled Preparing Students for the Digital Era, Lessons Learned from Fab Labs in School, highlights how exposing high school students into Fab Labs programs, and it basically the findings of this exposition in different majors, how generates different effects on students that had the possibility to join these programs, and how are the outcomes of basically their activities in these areas. The last paper was written by Walter Hector, from Bolivia, Handicraft, Revitalize Cultural Heritage Through Innovation and Digital Fabrication. And basically this paper exposes the recent impact of digital fabrication, not only in the production process, but also on the way which it is related to intangible cultural heritage, meaning handicraft. And basically this paper seeks to predict the future of handicrafts from a quantitative and qualitative aspect. Mainly in the panel, there were intersections between the first paper and the second paper. Even though the first paper talks about students from an older age range, it was interesting how these 2 papers could connect each other in a way, how exposing students to different Fab Lab programs enable them within a knowledge they are not aware of. And most of the last paper was in a different way, exposing how handicraft could be in a way entangled in digital fabrication, but not specifically in educational programs. Thank you, Caro.
Thank you so much, Josefina. And now I would like to ask Peter and Cindy, maybe if you could also present yourselves to the audience here. And if you have any questions or would like to interact with the moderators, feel free to do so.
Cindy, please go ahead.
Thanks, Peter. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Cindy Kotola. I'm professor in design for sustainability in Umeå Institute of Design in northern Sweden. It was -2 Celsius when I cycled to work this morning, so it's getting a little bit dicey on the roads. I have been researching Fab Labs and maker culture for quite a long time, and I have an especial interest in the environmental sustainability aspects. Peter?
Thank you, Cindy. My name is Peter Troxler. I'm probably well known in those circles. I've been around at Fab conferences, live and from a distance like now, since Fab 10. And at Fab 10, I was asked by a colleague, and Fab 10 was in the Netherlands, and then I was asked by a colleague at Rotterdam University.
Fab 5.
Fab 6.
Fab 6.
I'm mixing up numbers and years. It was Fab 6 in 2010. Thank you for keeping me sharp, Cindy. I met a then not yet colleague from Rotterdam University of Applied Sciences, who told me that he wanted to establish a Fab Lab at this university and asked me to help with that. The next year I built that Fab Lab here, and the next year they asked me to become a research professor. So that's 10 years ago that I became a research professor with my own Fab Lab, a Fab facility. And Cindy has been visiting a number of times. We share a strong collaboration since a long time ago.
I think that was Fab 10 or Fab 9.
Yeah, that could be. Indeed. And we've been organizing this paper track at the Fab conferences again for quite a while, and we're still enjoying it somehow. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it. I think it's very interesting to see that studying Fab Labs in various contexts has become something that's done globally, all over the world, as we have seen with the contributions from many countries. It's also interesting to see how, certainly in this conference, there is obviously this recurring issue of Fab Labs and education. That has sort of been a very constant theme in these conferences. And the other two things that I found very interesting this time round is the contextualization of Fab Labs. On the one hand, in the context of cities and the Fab cities, where we really start to study the phenomenon of Fab cities and how a Fab Lab interacts with an urban environment, relates to urban issues. And on the other hand, what you said, Lucas, the relation to places left behind, where those papers and show how Fab Labs not only connect to a digital manufacturing future, but also connect back to local issues, historical issues, cultural issues, indigenous issues. And I think in that sense, thinking about Fab Labs, describing Fab Labs, studying Fab Labs has evolved quite a bit. And I'm very looking forward to the presentation of Regina, which again is in that sense a very interesting contribution. But I'd like to have Cindy also comment on this year's papers, please.
I would agree with your summary. I think it's also interesting. We sometimes get a selection of what we call maybe technical papers, and it's very typical. You want to try something out, and this would be typical in human computer interaction field, for example. Proof of concept, try something, write it up. This is what we did. Yay. And there weren't actually so many papers this year. I think what we saw was actually, as Peter said, the kind of contextualization a little bit more. That yay, we did it, but it sits in this kind of sense. For example, looking at prototypes and technology readiness levels or things like that. So a little bit of the wider context around these, what we could call technical experiments. And I think what I'm also looking forward to with Regina's presentation is that in the moderators' summaries, in particularly the second panel name being critical circular economy, is this the theme of the year, Fab 17, critical. Let's unpack that word.
Thank you so much for you both. I think we had 5 moderators actually. Thank you so much for giving your overview of the papers as well. I would just like also to thank you. We have many authors here in the audience, so thank you so much for submitting your paper, for being willing to present it, to discuss it today. We had great sessions. And thank you so much for 3 great moderators. Thank you for this today. So I would just say thank you. And I would like now to call for the second part of the discussion. Thank you so much. So I would like to call to the stage Regina Sipos. Regina wrote a paper that's called Critical Making Responsibility Framework, together with other 3 authors, Maria Ackermann. Regina is from Germany, right? Hungary, it's written Germany here. Maria Ackermann is from Finland. Hanna Sari, Finland. It's a pleasure to have you here today. And I'll give the stage to you and Peter and Cindy. So yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And apologies for the misunderstanding. I do originally come from Hungary, but I work at the Technical University of Berlin. So Germany, indeed. Thank you. Okay, all right. I would also like to say that people are my personal heroes. So for me, being able to be here with you, even if it's just digitally, it's an absolute honor. And yes, where do we begin, Cindy and Peter?
I guess you could run us through what your paper is about. You know, where do you come from? What did you actually do? Because not everyone in the audience has been able to follow your presentation, or would they?
Yeah, that sounds like a good start, I think. Right, so it is indeed the beginning of the title, as you have it often with academic papers. So the first part is about the critical making responsibility framework, and it has a lot more words to it, which I'm not going to say now. But the background of this whole paper is that we indeed have a critical making project, which has been running for about 2 years now. And the whole thing grew out of my research for my PhD thesis, which has been a great honor. And so we actually wanted to look at what industry and high-level innovation can actually learn about responsibility from makers. But then we thought, well, if we're producing all this knowledge, then we might also as well, support makers in their endeavors. So if we're learning about responsibility from them, then we could also try to see how we can give back. And so the project itself, it is aimed at this whole, idea of responsible research and innovation in grassroots communities. And so when we talk about critical means the critical thinking behind the processes of making and prototyping. But we are actually also looking in case actions at questions of gender, education, and openness, open source hardware and open source business models for the open source hardware. So that's kind of a little bit of background about the consortium, the project itself. It's all participatory action research. So we work a lot together with makers all over the world. I did do a short presentation about this a couple of days ago, so I'm not going to repeat that part. But the paper itself is about us coming together and realizing that by combining two existing frameworks, one is the responsible research and innovation aspects, and the other side of it is the grassroots innovation movements framework. It's an analytical framework that has been developed. We are going to be much better equipped to actually see how responsible practices are happening in grassroots themselves. And so we made this huge matrix 4x4 with full of words that no one can follow, and with descriptions that no one ever wants to read. And we did realize that this was a very, very painful process for everyone. So of course we didn't want to do this to any maker whatsoever, because one of the consortium's kind of motto is that what we do not want is to take the joy and the fun out of making for makers. So what we did is kind of like an iterative process of taking these different dimensions, analyzing what is actually possible in terms of a relatively forward-looking responsible research and innovation framework. It is really forward-looking, anticipatory. It's about responsiveness. It's about designing the future in a participatory way, combined with the grassroots innovation movements framework, which is really a very retrospective framework, and it actually really focuses on movements, whereas we feel like the plurality of making is way more relevant. So actually looking at maker projects on the project level is significantly more interesting for research nowadays. So we did this combination, and for the past 2 years we have been asking makers to help us figure this out, how it could actually make sense for them, together with them. So it's extremely, again, participatory. It's a super iterative process. And now we were able to generate the first 14 questions with the help of, again, in total 50 to 60 makers, at least from around the world. And this is basically what the paper is about. And then some, reflection about what the motivation of a maker would be to fill this out, how to reward someone for filling this out, and actually working with these self-reflexive questions and kind of self-analyzing their own practices as they go. And yeah, we came to some conclusions. Maybe we can talk about those together, but that's basically it from my side.
Thank you so much. Now, before we head into conclusions, I've got one question, which is about your 4x4 matrix and the 14 questions. Because in my mind, 4x4 would mean 16 questions. Mm-hmm. So there's something missing, and there must be a reason for that.
Right. So we don't have any mathematicians on the team. Maybe that's how we ended up with this little miscalculation. As we were going through this iterative process with our co-researchers, we realized that actually some of those combinations did not make a lot of sense. And so when you're looking at the grassroots innovation movement, for example, in terms of inclusion, those 4 aspects of spaces and strategies and pathways and all that really made sense. But then there were actually 2 of them which we decided that were just not applicable, simply because the ideas behind the terms clashed But maybe, I mean, we're actually hoping that one day someone's going to point out to us that we missed something, and those other two are also applicable.
Is needed indeed.
Right.
That's always an important conclusion in an academic paper. So it would be interesting to actually engage in that conversation and understand, why this concept of framings related to anticipation and responsiveness did not resonate with your group at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, just to really briefly talk about it, was framings and anticipation, right? Yeah. As far as I remember, there was basically the idea was behind this that there was really again just the clash of a retrospectivity and how and anticipation being something that is very very forward-looking in the sense that it is happening in, let's say, kind of like trying to predict the future. Future framings, I think, are a little bit difficult to define. So again, it's the clash of the retrospectivity of the grassroots innovation movements framework, which makes it really easy to, when you're explaining the framings of how they developed in a particular grassroots innovation movement over time, it's not necessarily something that is easy to anticipate into the future, how framings might change.
Yes, certainly. Even though we saw that for midgets, how could you turn this framework for analysis into a framework of line, of a framework development?
Right.
Well, I think that relatively conventional universe and things here. If I want to introduce information into our practice, I would probably borrow some philosophy from your format for matrix. And I guess in such an application of your framework, I would be talking about reframing our lab into something more critical. Like from a designer's perspective, what if? And in that sense, I strongly feel that framing, this anticipatory framing of a space could really be an instrument of change.
Lovely, fantastic. Welcome on board in co-designing the the matrix. No, really, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that feedback. It's really, really appreciated. I think also, if you look at the current state of the questions, you're going to find that there's also, of course, a lot of overlap. So one of my favorite questions is the one around how do you, when you are designing, how it's in the pathways section, the second one. And so, of course, pathways was a term that absolutely did not resonate with makers because they were like, well, I don't know what a pathway is. It's this road ahead of me, of course, but what does that mean? And so we, together with the help of our co-researchers, we reshaped it into how does your activity, your practice contribute to a future, to your the future that you envision, right? And I think that was just a very, very inspiring question. But again, that also overlaps a little bit with how framings might change over time in the future, probably. Yeah.
You use the words design or development, and I'm tempted to use the word strategy or tactic. Would these help a Fab Lab to also start thinking more strategically?
Did you by any chance read my PhD thesis?
No, but I'm going to now.
I only defended it 2 weeks ago, so this is why it's not it's not public yet. But indeed, so my research focused on intrinsic design, And it had a specific focus on understanding the different strategies and tactics within the processes of grassroots critical makers. And so I think that those, again, are just fantastic terms that really have a lot of different meanings for different people. And this is definitely something that also, again, just going back to the process, we definitely struggled with how people understand different terms. And whether they say that, you know, a tactic is a part of a strategy, when in different understandings, those are two completely different things. But again, yeah, I mean, I hope that the framework itself might help people, especially grassroots critical maker communities, design those strategies and tactics on how they want to move forward with their practice.
Very interesting. What could maybe, I'm thinking about the audience and if how we are talking about framings, is that understood? Do you have some kind of an example of what it means to frame or reframe in this context?
Right.
Maybe.
Yeah. So in this paper, we mentioned two really excellent papers that already have used the grassroots innovation movement framework, which includes framings. It's one of their aspects. I think both are very relevant. One is in the Grassroots Innovation Movement's framework book by Smith and his colleagues, Adrian Smith. And it is indeed reflecting on hackerspaces, makerspaces, and also fab labs around the world, and writing about how they developed over time. And at the same time, there is also Arancio, who wrote about the gathering for open science hardware and how that movement developed over time. And I think that both of them are actually bringing some really, really interesting terms in terms of how makers frame or use terms to explain their own processes. And of course, these include, I mean, for us, the usual suspects, but it is framings in terms of, you know, open knowledge, open educational resources, even open sharing, open source everything, software as well as hardware. But also some people identify or frame themselves more as hackers because they would like to move away from the from let's say the term maker and so on and so forth. So those would be the framings that we're looking at. How does one define themselves?
Since you brought up the word openness, could you, in the paper, you also mention things around tensions around openness or, you know, dilemmas or trade-offs, or could you tell us a bit about that?
Right. Peter disappeared.
Oh
no.
And I can see myself twice in this Zoom, but
Lovely. Yes, exactly. So one of the things that we did in the consortium, in the project itself, was write a comprehensive paper about the state of openness in current literature about maker communities. And so one of the things that we found was that there were indeed some tensions about the definition of openness. So this is something that I also know from my own field research, that different people might understand openness in different ways. So if I borrow your idea and build on it, because you shared your idea with me, did we share that, you know, with each other openly, or how should I behave or build on your idea, right? So how do you give credit and so on and so forth. But I think that one of the key things around openness that we found also in literature was, for example, there's the very famous case of the MakerBot, right? Which used to be an open source project that many people contributed to. And so when when the decision was taken for it to go closed source, so to say, a commercial product, then a lot of people lost maybe a little bit of faith in open source. But at the same time, we also see that there is so much openness because people understand the value added in being able to spread ideas and also prototypes and blueprints and so on and so forth openly. So there's absolutely a willingness, but maybe there's a little bit of mistrust around it. And that's also something that we've seen with our case actions. People who have applied for the Open Hardware Prize program, mentorship program. They were worried about, let's say, also having their ideas presented here in Bali, and this is why I didn't end up presenting their idea, because they said, you know, we haven't, even if they could have thought about Creative Commons or something similar to protect their idea, they said, well, we're thinking about maybe patenting it at some point so that our idea is protected. So these are, I think, some of the tensions that we are talking about. Of course, IP rights only make sense in places where there's also the legalities around it, but again, people are just worried.
Interesting. Yeah, very good summary. The fact that you brought up MakerBot is interesting because then it would tie to my next question, which is going to be about inclusion. Because I use, when I'm working with design students and design students who are going to become product or service designers often, or product service system designers, I use MakerBot as a way to show the tensions in openness, also with regard to what that product kind of allows for. So now the product of MakerBot, where it's closed source and it's like a black box, is very much easier for a much wider percentage of people to use compared to the original MakerBot, which was for a highly specialized audience.
Yeah.
And I think also Fab Labs can also make the strategic choice about, do they go, for example, the library makerspace way, where it's maybe it's a bit more black boxed, but people can come in, they can use it. Maybe you don't get the specialized kind of audience compared to a very specialized Fab Lab that might be very exclusive because it attracts a certain type of inventor or user.
Right.
So these are also kind of design decisions on what a Fab Lab wants to do that I would compare to kind of like, are you the consumer MakerBot or are you the old open source MakerBot?
Right. Exactly. And I mean, this is exactly what we've also seen in software, I think, a little bit. So my partner is an open source software designer. And I think that the one of the reasons why their project called Nextcloud became so widespread, I think, at least they claim, is because it is indeed very user-friendly. So the UX, they really put so much effort and work into the UX compared to other open source projects that it just becomes usable to any kind of person, you know? And so I think exactly that is the question. How do you design it? Do you design it in a way that it enables access for anyone, which again costs a lot of money? Many open source projects don't necessarily have that expertise. Maybe we don't have the expertise around it. So what does that really mean? And there's some really interesting research around how maker spaces are also designed around particular blueprints, which actually ends up excluding a lot of people. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a piece of software or a piece of hardware. The whole space can also sometimes be designed in an exclusive way, in a way that it excludes people. And so this is why I'm so happy to see kind of the rise also of, you know, of feminist hacker spaces, of just like all sorts of open spaces that invite people in who would not necessarily be the maker that you imagine when you say the word maker.
Interesting point. If and inclusion, of course, very much encompassing the principles of equity, equality, and so on. Do you have examples of inclusive or exclusiveness? I think for some people, we might get just so used to our community that we don't actually realize how the design of the space or our behaviors or things like that might make some people feel unwelcome.
Right.
So do you have any examples?
Yeah, so actually one of the, going back just briefly to the paper, one of the very interesting revelations that we had in our last co-creative session was when someone said, oh, now that I am seeing this question in this matrix, in this framework, I actually am asking myself, if you hadn't been asking me this question, how would I have known that I need to ask that question? And the question was whether, do I know who I'm including in my practice, and whether I know or reflect upon who I'm excluding from it, right? And so this is where I think we felt like our work was really legit finally, when really someone said, oh, without this prompt, I wouldn't have thought about this. And so, yeah, this is, it was a magical moment.
To think of who actually is invisible, who should be at the table and in the room, and if they're not in the room, what's stopping them from coming in. I think that's very, very interesting. Peter, nice to see you.
Yeah,
Welcome back.
I had some breakdown on my laptop. Apparently, it's not talking to me anymore, so I had to switch to mobile.
Sorry to hear that.
We'll fix that later.
Excellent. Peter, did you have anything? Burning questions?
Well, I sort of missed part of your very interesting discussion about inclusiveness, which certainly is a topic that that bothers us a lot here at my university as well. You know, being in a rather urban environment with many nationalities, with all sorts of social differences as well, and this idea of this question, how could we make our work in general and in the lab specifically more relevant for a broader range of people. So also, for instance, we started to work with refugees lately, people from Turkey who do not speak Dutch. So we needed to reinvent how we use language in a lab setting, which is a very intriguing and ongoing process. And we noticed that certainly for us academics, who are quite often, I mean, Cindy, you're more a visual person in your work, but many academics tend to be very language based. So there's certainly this is an interesting step to also develop in parallel to you know, the affordances of making which are primarily not language based.
Yeah.
And there's another interesting thought that also came up in that one other paper about open source machines and the comparison between Germany and Tunisia, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
That while we're you know, we're talking open source hardware, and imagine if we make files and bills of materials findable and open source, that this would actually allow people to replicate what we're doing, but we forget to include the possibilities and impossibilities of local hardware that's available, of local manufacturing practices that are available. I mean, this is getting a bit technical, Regina. Is that a discussion that somewhere in your occupation with the idea of openness played a role?
Openness. Did you say openness?
You know,
sorry.
I said openness. Yeah. Yes. You know. Again, it has this inclusion exclusion to it. When we assume that certain materials or certain parts are readily available,
right?
And only when people try to replicate our designs, we find out that this assumption is not correct.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Yes. Sorry, I was a bit surprised by the term openness because while you were speaking, I had so many other words and just for me very important thoughts that I learned from others come to mind. And one of it, so there is a couple of things. We have a set of critical making principles in the consortium that we work with. And one of them is, so there's a couple different sets of things that we work with, but one of them is, for example, making things that make sense, and also looking at how the practice can actually be situated so that it makes sense in the local context. And I think both of those terms really resonate with the thoughts that you were just expressing now, right? And I think that openness, not only in the terms of that, you know, your space should be open, that your website should be open and inviting to people, that your activities should be open and inviting, but also in terms of engaging with your local with your local environment is something that, again, we can learn so much from grassroots innovators. So, for example, there's our friend Sename from Togo, I believe, who has been building these small maker spaces where every single person who comes there, they can become a member for free, but they have to actually engage with like a 1 to 5 kilometer radius within of the space itself. And so, for example, what they came up.
So
I think it might be the party, so that's definitely more important than this discussion. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Okay, a big applause. Thank you, Regina. Thank you so much. And congratulations for winning this best paper, but also for your PhD. So congratulations.
Thank you, but also congratulations to everyone else. I attended the talks today of all the other papers. They were very, very interesting. So this is by no means somehow, I don't know, our paper is better than yours. They're all really time worthy. So thank you.
And thank you for the great discussion, Peter and Cindy. Thank you so much. Perfect, thank you. So before we close, I would just like to a big applause to Peter and Cindy because they made this happen. And also I would like to call my colleague, please come here to stage, Vasilis Niarus, that made it happen here locally and organized all the panels and all the discussions. Thank you. So yeah, thank you both. Thank you both.
Thank you backstage as well.
Yeah, backstage is here. Thank you. And so we're closing our Fab 17 conference. Thank you so much for all the authors that came, that discussed, the ones that couldn't come. Thank you so much for submitting your papers. And we really had really nice discussions, really interesting papers. And yeah, I'm looking forward for next year. Thank you so much. Right.